If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. This is the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn, your host, and I want to welcome you today. If you're a regular listener, I hope you've been gaining insights along the way that you've been able to apply in your life, and I hope that you're seeing positive changes. If you're new to the show, I want to say that it's wonderful that you've taken a step to gain control of this harmful behavior that I know can be such a source of shame and pain in your life. Whether it's this podcast or another recovery resource, the fact that you're looking for ideas and advice to help you is a very good sign. Even if recovery seems daunting right now, know that if you can hold on to your motivation to overcome binge eating, and if you can focus on your desire to be free of this, you'll naturally start making progress. You can take the ideas that you learn in this podcast and ideas that you learn elsewhere, and then take the steps that make the most sense to you. As you gather new ideas, you may feel your mindset just naturally start shifting without you actually having to do anything at all. Gaining new insights that resonate with you can have a very powerful effect. So just listen today with an open mind and allow new ideas to occur to you. If anything I say seems confusing today, know that you can go back and listen to the first 11 episodes, which contain all of the basics of this approach. Once you listen to those episodes, anything I say today or in future episodes will make much more sense to you. Today I'm going to give you a tip for having more awareness when you're eating. The simple tip is to put food on a plate or another serving dish before eating it, whenever possible, as you're learning to eat normally and to stop binge eating. Now, at first, it might seem like this tip is a bit too simple, but as I explain it more deeply, I hope you'll see the purpose behind it and think about this common advice in a new way that maybe you haven't before. Remember, there are 2 recovery goals in the Brain Over Binge approach. The first goal is to learn to dismiss the urges to binge, and the second goal is to learn to eat adequately. Putting food on a plate can actually help you with both of these goals. A question I often get relates to grazing, which means eating very often when you're not even hungry, and it often includes eating out of a box or a bag, or just standing in front of the refrigerator or standing at the counter, and not really taking the time to serve yourself a proper meal or snack, and typically not sitting down to eat it. Grazing typically involves eating mindlessly, which means not really paying attention to what or how much you're eating. Grazing and mindless eating behaviors are not the same as a binge, but sometimes your mindless eating behaviors might lead to urges to binge, and sometimes these type of behaviors may feel very similar to a binge. For example, you may find yourself at lunchtime not really knowing what you want to eat, so you start picking at leftovers from the refrigerator, and maybe continuing to do that until you feel like you may have overeaten a little. And when you actually binge, you may also have similar behaviors. You may stand in front of the refrigerator eating leftovers, but it probably feels much more ravenous, and you may eat a lot quicker and in much greater quantities. So the behaviors of grazing and of binging may share some common elements. You may typically eat out of boxes or bags of food during binges, so if you find yourself doing this, and starting to feel out of control, but not necessarily binge eating, you may wonder what to do about this. Like I said, eating straight out of a box, like of crackers or cookies, for example, or eating leftovers straight from the refrigerator does not automatically mean you're binge eating. Most people do this sometimes. It doesn't have to be a problematic behavior. However, when you're first trying to quit binge eating, these behaviors that feel similar in some ways to a binge or that tend to lead to urges to binge may feel confusing or unsettling to you. A normal eater might do this, and they may certainly have feelings of wanting to continue eating when they're holding a whole bag of chips, for example, or something else that's highly palatable, but they're able to put it aside after a reasonable amount. Sometimes the normal eater may eat more than they thought they would. Sometimes they may eat less, but they're still able to gauge generally when enough is enough. For you, as a recovering binge eater, you may not feel like you have this reasonable gauge of when you've had enough. Once you start eating from a box or bag or straight out of the refrigerator, especially if it's highly processed foods, you may feel compelled to keep going, and much more so than a normal eater. Like I said, normal eaters might also have that desire to keep eating more of a pleasurable food. This is really normal, but it may feel much more compelling for you. You may start mindlessly reaching for more and more, and even if you don't go into a binge, you may end up eating a lot more than you planned or a lot more than you wanted to, and sometimes without even realizing it. If this is the case for you, you may benefit from taking a moment to put the food you're about to eat on a plate or in a bowl or another serving dish or even just on a napkin, and then go away from the entire box or the entire bag or go away from the refrigerator and sit down to eat it. This is especially helpful with sweets or really any type of food you tend to eat too much of right now. I know this is a tip that most of you have likely heard before, but if you're currently not doing it and you're having trouble with mindless eating, it's worth considering because it's a very simple tool that you can use right now to support yourself while you're learning to dismiss urges to binge and while you're learning to eat adequately. You can also use this strategy throughout your life to be a little more mindful of how you're eating. It's not just a tip for recovering binge eaters. If you've heard this advice in the past, it's possible you may have heard it in the context of dieting advice. If you're weighing and measuring your food on a diet, the purpose of it is to try to keep your portions small and try to not allow yourself to eat what you may physically be hungry for. This is not what I'm suggesting at all. I'm not suggesting to put food on a plate as a way to make sure that you don't eat over a certain amount or that you keep your portions really small. I do not want you to use this as a dieting tactic. There's no need to measure or to count when you put food on a plate or a bowl. And definitely don't try to give yourself as little as possible. Remember, the aim is to eat adequately. I want you to put on a plate what you feel looks reasonable and adequate and gives you enough nourishment and is going to be satisfying for you. Don't be restrictive in dishing out your serving. For example, don't put 4 chips on a plate and tell yourself you absolutely cannot have any more than that. And there's also no need to make eating on a plate a rule. You certainly don't have to always do this. If you tell yourself you have to do it every time you eat, it sets you up to think you've failed if you do eat out of a box or a bag or straight from the refrigerator. And that's certainly not the case. You haven't failed if you do these things. The goal is just to use this tactic when you can to insert some more mindfulness into your eating. The goal is not to take away your freedom and force yourself into always eating in a certain way. A great thing about putting food on a plate or a bowl is it helps you pause before eating so that you can notice your physical signals. Taking that small amount of extra time to serve what you're going to eat gives you a little mental space before the first bite so that you can notice what hunger signals you may be having and think about what amount of food you may require. During the meal or snack, eating from a plate allows you to get a visual of how much you've eaten and how much you have left and how that much food feels in your body. And why having a visual is important is because sometimes in eating disorders and when you're stuck in a cycle of dieting and binge eating, you can lose touch with your hunger and fullness. So if you feel like you've lost touch over time, I believe you have to rely on your eyes and that visual of what looks normal. And you also have to rely on your higher rational brain as well, because you know what is generally normal. Even though your body's signals don't quite tell you at this point that you're full or that you're hungry. Your body signals might not be 100% reliable right now. But you can use your eyes and your rational brain to really see what adequate eating looks like. Having a visual of an adequate amount of food on a plate helps you eat normal portions despite the fact that your body's signals may not be completely reliable when you first quit binge eating and when you first quit dieting. But after you eat normally day after day, your body's signals will start to normalize again, and you'll start to feel hunger and feel fullness in a more normal way. And then you can use that to naturally guide your eating. But that may not happen for several weeks or even months. So until then, you need to rely on what you can visualize as normal and what you know to be normal in your higher brain. As your body's signals are regulating, if you can take that extra time to put food on a plate and sit down and eat it if you can, you'll be much more likely to notice your body's signals and then start to use them. And I'm not saying you have to sit there and eat extremely slowly, and I'm not saying you can't think about anything else but the food and your body's signals, and I'm not saying you can't do anything else while you're eating, or that you have to chew every bite a certain number of times. I think those type of recommendations can end up feeling hindering and can lead to some guilt when real life doesn't afford the time for sitting down and eating 100% mindfully and thinking about nothing else but the food and what you're feeling. That just may not be realistic for you in a lot of situations. I'm only suggesting that you can cultivate some small moments of awareness surrounding your eating. And putting food on a plate can definitely help you with that. Putting food on a plate also gives you a better chance to choose a healthy stopping point for your meal or snack, because it puts time and space between your cravings for more and your ability to get more food quickly. Even if, after you eat what you've put on the plate, let's use chips for example, you go back and get more chips, you have not failed. It's not about never going back for more. It's about having the space and the time to make that choice a genuine choice. If the bag is right there in arm's reach and in your hands, there sometimes just isn't enough time between the craving for more and the action to have that awareness and to make a mindful, genuine choice. Even if the first few times you try to do this, you end up going back for a little more, you're still cultivating mindfulness because you're allowing yourself time to feel your craving for a little bit longer before acting on it, because you actually have to get up and go get more. Even if you don't dismiss that craving, you'll certainly notice it. Whereas if the bag was right in front of you, you'd be operating more on autopilot and more automatically. It's important to accept that if you're used to grazing and continuing to eat long after you've had enough, putting food on a plate won't magically take that desire away. When you're done with what's in your plate, your lower brain will likely prompt you to get up and get more food. And that's okay. And that can even be the case if it's the most healthy food possible that you're eating. It doesn't always have to be junk food for you to have a craving for more. But what putting food on a plate does is it gives yourself that tiny bit of extra time and space to feel your craving. And then as you feel them, you may start to view these cravings as not so threatening and not so urgent anymore. You may still decide to go back for another serving, but that decision will start to feel more like a genuine choice, and you may find yourself choosing the option to go back and get more less and less. Even if the craving to go back and get more is not technically an urge to binge, you can still use it to practice making choices that feel good to you instead of feeling so out of control. And this will help you when you have urges to binge. It will help you realize that you do get to choose. You don't have to follow every craving, and you certainly don't have to follow your urges to binge. That concludes my discussion about eating on a plate. I hope you'll commit to using this simple strategy sometimes, and that you'll experience the benefits that more mindfulness in your eating can provide. If you're new to this show, I want to tell you about my free ebook. It's called The Brain Over Binge Basics, and you can use it to get a jump start in your recovery to really learn how to dismiss your urges to binge. You can go to the show notes and sign up to get that free ebook, and by signing up, you'll also receive my monthly newsletter, which includes a blog post and other recovery resources that I truly hope you'll find helpful. Thank you so much for listening today. No matter where you are in your recovery, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.